To introduce our wonderful speakers today. We have Deanna Minich here with us, a nutrition scientist, international lecturer, educator, and author with over 20 years of experience in academia and the food and dietary supplement industries. Deanna is currently the Chief Science Officer at Symphony Natural Health. She has been active as a functional medicine clinician in clinical trials and in her own practice, Food and Spirit. She's the author of 6 consumer books on wellness topics, 4 book chapters, and over 50 scientific publications. Through her talks, workshops, groups, and in-person retreats, she helps people transform their lives practically and artfully through nutrition and lifestyle. Ashley Koff is also here with us. She is the leading national expert on truly personalized nutrition. Bringing 25 years experience as a practitioner and educator, Koff founded the Better Nutrition Program to bring personalized nutrition for better health span outcomes to everyone nationwide. She's the nutrition director for UC Irvine Susan Samueli Integrative and Functional Medicine Fellowship, a frequent media expert, and a 2-time author, with her 3rd book arriving in January 2026 from HarperCollins. Koff loves to travel, hike, dogs, and is an obsessed NBA fan. And with that, I turn it over to you both.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. And just a big, I'm so pleased, that we have been able to connect. I've learned a lot about FODzyme, and I've learned a lot about your interest in supporting practitioners to help us really be able to optimize digestive health, really with a food-focused or food-led approach. And I know Deanna, really, like, we just, both of us are so excited about that piece and just figuring out how we can do that more successfully. So the purpose of today is this is just a totally selfish agenda. I would, as soon as the conversation came up, I was like, I know what I want to talk about: perimenopause and the gut hormone connection. Because I feel like a woman after 40, certainly a woman at 51, is, we need these conversations. We need more of them. But one of the things when we were diving into it was really, how do we make this about optimizing nutrition? And so what we want to do today, prior to answering your questions, is really walk through a framework for understanding nutrient optimization and some of the places where recommendations that have been more mass have not, certainly if they've been mass gender neutral, have not been helpful, but also have not really tied into the gut hormone side of things for women through perimenopause. We want you to understand that. So we're going to go through the physiology, we'll go through the nutrition, and then we'll dive into specific recommendations. So we do endeavor to be able to provide that with you today. You heard both of our backgrounds. So by way of disclaimer, we both do consulting, teaching, et cetera, as a part of that. So just wanted to acknowledge. And what we really want to be able to do is connect the dots today, and really look at digestive health and hormones during perimenopause, look at the role of nutrition, dive into phytonutrients. I love to call out our Plantioxidants and all of the benefits there, and really use an evidence-based and practitioner-informed approach to how do we personalize nutrition on that part. So we're here. One of the things that I think is so often misrepresented is the order of things. So let's start off with, the majority of us do not enjoy optimal digestion throughout our lifespan like that. And definitely, as we think about achieving health span, digestive health disruptions, whether disease, complaints, challenges, are factors. And one of the ones that I think gets so missed out on is the fact that when the hormones are actually shifting, they're throwing digestion off course. So any hormonal health intervention, any space, we don't turn and immediately replace a hormone. We want to look at, in order to optimize hormone health, we want to make sure that we're addressing this disruption. That may mean that there are factors that have challenged the hormone production. That may mean that there are factors that are, from a digestive standpoint, the deployment. That may mean that we are actually in a space where we're unable, where, the complaints and the challenges are digestive related. And often they get band-aided or discussed as part of, again, address this with the hormones first. So what we really want to talk about today, the reason we're talking about the gut hormone connection, is they are absolutely codependent, symbiotic, interdependent, all of those different co-words that we want to use. So to optimize health span during perimenopause, we have to co-create a solution, that looks at them together. So let's look at what is actually going on inside of us when we have changes in hormone production. We look at this perimenopause time that, can be decades. It could certainly be a decade. It can be, I don't really think in most instances, unless there's a medically induced, say, menopause, that it's going to be, much less than several years. So it really is a significant time period. And so we'll see changes in the production of hormones. And the area that often gets the most attention are the sex hormones. And by the way, I should say, we're thrilled that they're getting attention because I think for a long time they weren't getting attention. And so, we're thrilled with that side. What may not be getting as much attention in sort of this time period is the understanding of the changes of stress hormones. And where I've been focusing my work really since 2005 is really in the hormones that are created, that are produced, and we have tons of them. It's not just going to be the couple that I mentioned, but what I'm deeming the metabolic switch hormones, I'll talk about that in a second, but the ones that are produced in the lining of the digestive tract or throughout the digestive tract and secreted, and where there are receptor sites, throughout digestion as well as in the brain and in other places. So things like we hear a lot about GLP-1 today, which is not a medication. It's a peptide hormone in the lining of our digestive tract. CCK, PYY, GIP, GIP, some people call it. So there are a lot of hormones, in this space. And what we know is, because we know the vagus nerve is a two-lane or is a bidirectional, so two-direction highway, because we know that, so much of what is happening in the gut is happening as a result of choices that we're making, as well as things that we're exposed to. Those hormones are being impacted. So I want to dive a little bit more into that and leave a little bit more of the sex hormone, stress hormone discussion for Deanna's side. But the functional changes are the ones that, we're all like, wait a second. Did I wake up overnight and my hair, skin, and nails? Is it bags under my eyes, or is it, significant skin changes? I was talking to a woman the other day and we were laughing, but I was like, I think I just didn't even recognize it. One day in public, I was just like, had my hand up my shirt and was scratching my back. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm itchy. Like these things are coming out of they're all over the place, right? And we're not necessarily tying hormonal changes to what's happening with our hair, skin, and nails. And more importantly, for a lot of our, for a lot of our patients and clients or individually, so many of the solutions out there are not telling us to look inside. They're saying like, try this on your hair, try this on your skin, try this for your nails. Other functional changes are motility, and our motility may change in both directions at whatever moment our hormone, however our hormones showed up in that moment, right? So I have women who will tell me that for the first time in their life during ovulation, they notice constipation or diarrhea, loose stools, or even reflux being exacerbated, whereas historically, maybe it was a few days before their period. Like the whole timing of these changes, has shifted. I have others that are experiencing significant constipation for the first time in their life, or, things are just moving along. And when things move along too quickly, we know that, there are challenges with absorption and on that piece. Your pelvic floor, I think this is a really big myth for women who have not had children, where there's this perception that really it's just the act of giving birth that is altering the pelvic floor and the muscles. And, whether it's from a urologic standpoint, where we're looking at bladder muscles, or we're looking at the pelvic floor in totality, there are shifts that are happening. Muscle shifts, body composition shifts are happening, where there's a drive, or a greater drive towards fat deposition. We often hear about belly fat during this time period. That's so so important for us to acknowledge, as an indicator that digestion has been thrown off course. So we really want to take the time to recognize that all of these things are indicators, and many more, of hormone production and deployment changes. And if we remember that our hormones are both made from fats and also made from protein. So we have our peptide hormones, which I'm going to talk about, but we look at sex and stress hormones and we're talking about fat soluble, we also have to remember that even if there's a declining amount of them, we're still using them up in our body. And then if we also come in and start to add them, bless you, for topical progesterone, things like that. If we come in and we're increasing those, then we have to make sure that our detoxification system is working successfully, because these in the fat soluble and the protein, but especially in the fat soluble, they're not, when they're used up, they're not in a form where they can be readily eliminated. So how do we make sure that the problem for someone isn't an increased risk of disease because of adding a hormone, as part of a treatment protocol, or supporting the body to naturally produce those hormones, but it's actually that their detoxification system is not working as well. For me, this has been a place where genetics and coming back to somebody's genetics has also been really helpful, because I've been able to go in and look and see, are you genetically designed with certain efficiencies and inefficiencies that I now need to lean into during this time in perimenopause, to help you with optimizations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. There is a lot going on. And one of the challenges we also have is our ability to measure from a laboratory standpoint, our ability to know what normal is, which I would suggest for any perimenopausal woman. Her normal is where she's at in the moment, and then you sort of look from there. And that's going to be really key for us. Some of these functional changes are actually our best measures of outcomes, improvements, and how certain things are working, because the body, the hormones, they kind of just show up how they want to any given week or month or day or hour, et cetera, on that part. Okay, so what can we actually do about it? Better nutrition, by definition, there wasn't one, so I created one. Feel free to use this. I don't own it, but I just wanted to create a context for all to get on the same page. It's giving your body, so it's hyper personalized, giving your body what it needs today in this moment to run better, while reducing or avoiding what can overwhelm, irritate, and disrupt these efforts. So it's time stamped. And that's one of the things I was just talking about, that we want to make sure that we're coming in and we're saying, hey, if I have a bacterial overgrowth right now, if I have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth right now, then what my body needs right now is, it still has the same needs for fiber and for plantioxidants and for all these other things, but I may not be able to consume those. And if I'm recommended a low FODMAP diet and I remove all of those, then my detoxification and my digestion and some of the things we're talking about may suffer. So that was really my first introduction to FODzyme with patients, where you're able to come in and say, hey, if I'm able to use this, can I actually improve their nutrition? Can I help them achieve better nutrition right now because they can tolerate, something a little bit better? And we also have to remember that overwhelming can just be too much at one time. So is the indication right now that, hey, somebody's having the kale and the wild salmon, but just too much at that one time, or they're trying to meet these protein needs that have been presented in very mass and massive ways, like 1 gram per pound of body weight, which I would actually say is not going to be optimal. And we'll talk about that in a second. But certainly not just telling someone that and not giving them guardrails for how much at one time in the day, and especially, based on their digestive function. So we can think about and what we can help people understand is that a destination point during perimenopause is to really dial in on what is your better nutrition. How are we going to measure it? How can we achieve it on that part? And one of the reasons I want to talk about that is I mentioned, and I think, perimenopause is a time period where I would say, we have hundreds and hundreds of patients that have come to us either on a semaglutide tirzepatide. So these are the peptide hormones that are either from a compounding pharmacy or from the brand names like Ozempic and Wegovy and Zepbound. And one of the things that, there are amazing things that are happening. So we're taking somebody who maybe has been on no caffeine or decaf, and we're suddenly having them experience a caffeinated version of how their metabolism can work, and also a calming of things like food noise and, and some of the overwhelm, that has and even infobesity that has led them to not be able to be successful in better body composition and weight health goals. But when we look at that, a lot of the dosage of those, remember these synthetic versions are designed to not work the way that the hormones in your body work. So the hormones like GLP-1 and GIP in your own digestive tract, they break down after 1 to 2 minutes. They're designed to have an enzyme come in and break it down so the L cells secrete it. They get the signal, they secrete it, and boom, and it's there. These hormones are staying on 24/7, maybe at a lower dose, maybe at a higher dose. Maybe they're getting 4 shots of espresso in a moment and, they're staying on for 24/7, which may also be impacting their sleep and may not be, they may be coming in and saying like, hey, do I need like melatonin and like what can help me sleep and all these other things. And we're going to talk about that because if we are dealing with a patient there, we absolutely need to look at a more collaborative approach to help turn off some of the signals that are staying on, much longer, that are helping them in the moment with their success. However, what the success of semaglutide, tirzepatide, this whole space is telling us is that almost everyone, and with a guarantee in a perimenopausal woman, we have GLP-1 GIP dysfunction. We have your hormones are shifting and they're throwing your digestion off course. We are seeing that the lining of the digestive tract is not able to produce, detects this at the same degree, the signals and some of these things, and actually deliver what we need to all of the receptor sites. And we're finding that these receptor sites are in the brain, some of the production for the hormones in the brain. They're in the liver, they're in the pancreas, we're finding them in the thyroid, we're here, more organs throughout the body. So if this is the case, this is an area that we need to be looking at. So just that one hormone combination is so important for us to look at as we're thinking about how do we nourish the gut hormone connection. And what it leads us to is not just taking a probiotic. Where we have been is with recommendations that say, hey, if you have gas and bloating, add a probiotic, and maybe you need a different strain of a probiotic. Or maybe now, if we're trying to optimize those hormones, try the probiotics that work in the gut lining to actually help produce some of that. Absolutely. But for way too many of us, I feel like on repeat these days, I'm having a conversation about intestinal permeability. We have to make sure we're optimizing the gut lining from a nutrition standpoint. We need to make sure we got that glue going. So glutamine, I just did a great chat with Dr. Russell Jaffe. It was so fun to like talk about just, the fact that I learned that, and you definitely, Deanna, we probably learned that like glutamine was this conditionally essential amino acid. I'm like, well, perimenopause means it is a condition that this becomes a very important amino acid for us. So if we're telling people to take in protein, we need to make sure that we're helping them get in glutamine as part of that. And we may need to be able to use that, supplementally as well. And then we want to look at the other things that can repair intestinal permeability, which also mean things like looking at your alcohol consumption, looking at your NSAIDs, your, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, your aspirin, looking at your Motrin, looking at your actual anti-inflammatories, looking at medications like steroids, looking at history of hormones, what have I been using? What treatments have I been under? Have I had treatments for cancer? Have I had other, things? And is there stress or is there vagus nerve dysfunction that is also affecting my microbiome and also affecting, these? So really important for us to look at nutrition that can help to optimize and repair any intestinal permeability insufficiencies. I'm not even talking about deficiency. I'm not saying frank leaky gut, but we really can see a benefit in this part. The second part is this is muscle function. So the other thing that's happening when our hormones are shifting is we need to make sure that we're regulating, literally helping people be regular. But you'll notice that I put a comment in there to make sure that we're doing that before adjusting fiber. It's especially increasing fiber or looking at the different varieties of that. Because if you've ever had one patient or if you've ever experienced it yourself, if you increase fiber and you're in a system where it's not moving or where there's intestinal overgrowth, where the bacteria, the microbiome is not aligned, you are going to have somebody very unhappy, super bloated, very gassy, not fun, and likely also experience some reflux. And we don't want them to then be put on a PPI, for that part. We want to recognize that nourishing it, whereas absorption is twofold, digestion and hydration. So we want to make sure that we're not just drinking water, but we're absorbing it. So do we have the electrolytes in a better amount? We have people do our hydration test, on that part. From a digestive standpoint, we want to make sure that, when we're looking at absorption there, not just the lining of the digestive tract, but enzymes and things that will be breaking the food down into a form, where it's better absorbed. I come back to FACN, I think so brilliant and helpful in that specific application. We also want to look at optimizing blood sugar, and we want to debunk the myth that you give up on carbohydrates. Please don't give up on carbohydrates during perimenopause or ever. But we don't want to look at that in isolation. And we want to say of the 40 plus factors that impact blood sugar, 10 of them are nutrition. And then of the other 30, many of them are super important for a healthy lifestyle. Like listen to Stacy Sims, and we want to be hitting it hard. We want to make sure that we're strength training and really doing things that our body is going to perceive as stress, so that we're building that lean body mass and retaining that lean body mass. This is going to impact blood sugar, so that's going to be important. I think I felt absorption was so important that I doubled it down on it in there. So just noting that. We also want to make sure that we are not messaging to give somebody 1 gram per pound of lean body mass, 1 gram per pound of body weight in protein. It is so great that we've moved from where 0.8 or some range per kilogram, and recognizing that that's probably insufficient. But more importantly, we want to recognize that the body does not have daily totals. That's not what it's accountable for. It is designed like a race car. At its pit stops, it wants to have what it needs. And what it needs is an amount there. It can't have, it's like Goldilocks, not too little and not too much. So maybe about 15 grams for many of us is going to be like where we're not too little on that part. And maybe above 30 grams, maybe into that 40 grams might be too much, and especially depending on digestive function. And then we want to look at the amino acids. We want to look at leucine. We want to look at glutamine. One of the brilliant things of all the plant sources of proteins is the variety of different amino acids that you get in there. One of the brilliant things of the animal sources is how available they are and how easy, to get in a bunch of them, or to get in those building blocks. So we really, we can benefit our patients by really helping kind of pull that apart and share with them and look at it and give them ideas for what they consume. Hemp seeds, the wild salmon of the plant kingdom, is like one of my favorite things for perimenopause, because we get the gamma-linolenic fatty acid, hair, skin, and nails. We come in and we get, fiber. We get protein, and a variety of amino acids, and we get like things like manganese and iron. I mean, just so easy in that way to add that in. So look at some of those things. Same thing with improving and optimizing a fatty acid profile. We also really want to move people away from the number on the scale. JJ Virgin was just saying we actually want to weigh as much as possible. We just want our weight to be coming from lean body mass. That's going to dictate how we actually navigate menopause and our postmenopausal years healthier. So maybe instead of a basic scale, maybe we're looking at an in-body and saying like, okay, let's actually look at your fat mass and your lean body mass, and setting goals accordingly there. Just a comment, we now, instead of BMI, have BRI. I think anything that takes your weight and looks at it compared to your height is just losing. Like, we really do need to just know what's going on inside of you. So I'm just not sold that BRI is the better BMI. I think just looking at your body composition, and getting that information. And then so critical for us to look at elevated triggers and address where possible, especially finding a way to just like nicely take that which we do not have control over and drop it into another bucket and let go of it. So is that the role of meditation? Is that the role of journaling? Is that the role of drawing and colors and painting and music and all the things that Deanna speaks so brilliantly to? During this time period, one of the things we can do to nourish the gut hormone connection is just have the gut have less work, less communication coming at it, and being able to work. We could go on, we could talk about caloric window and other pieces. And we have in our protocol for this, that we share with practitioners, we go through those different pieces, and it is really important to look at all of that. But I just, here we're sort of the standouts on that part. So I want to move over into, what is one of my favorite parts of the conversation, and certainly collaboration with Deanna, and that is, this whole concept of what the plant kingdom has presented for us, as well as for all the other animals that are out there, and for our visual and for our multi-sensory experience. But we really want to look at what I call plantioxidants, but it's the benefits here. And I was just talking to somebody about coffee the other day, and like how one of the benefits of an organic coffee is, and certainly one that's been tested to be glyphosate residue free, is that you're not getting in some of the stuff that will be like, kind of washing your floor with dirty shoes. But one of the other pieces is that coffee will have produced more polyphenols because it isn't grown with, these pesticides that suppress that, or, that quote unquote do that protective work for it. So polyphenols are going to support the hormone production in the lining of the digestive tract. They feed, and help with butyrate and, come in and help to feed. We've looked at like Akkermansia and Clostridiums and all of these and can come in and feed the GLP-1 and other production. So really important. They're critical for optimal detoxification. So I'm a glucoraphanin. I think for my curly hair, I just try to message to everyone, like be a broccoli, like on that part. But, when we look at that, it's like we want to make sure that we're getting in, that brilliant combination of glucoraphanin and myrosinase, and our digestive system may not be producing myrosinase as well. So how do we make sure we get that sulforaphane in? We need them to clean up the mess that we make from living healthfully and hormone production, and also the risk of disease in that part. So there's no better person ever anywhere to listen to about the rainbow than Deanna. So if you're not already following and paying attention to all the science, I'm going to turn it over and just ooh and on listen here. But just wanted to tee up, and now you can talk to the science of that and lead us into how we can really use these plants in their medicinal intended tool to help us regulate and nurture our system during perimenopause.
Woo, you are so inspiring, Ashley. So thank you for that intro. It's just great foundational stuff that all of us need to have at the forefront, especially through perimenopause. So yeah, I think when we hear that phrase, eat the rainbow, it sounds so simplistic, but there's actually a lot of science underneath that. In fact, I wrote a review article, as you could see back there, going through the color code of nature, as I call it. And this is something to bring out to your perimenopausal patients in the way of making food fun again. I kind of feel like food has become so analytical. We live in our head when it comes to just eating and not really having this sharing of an artful, soulful experience. But what I have seen just through pattern recognition of looking at the data and looking at the different phytochemicals is that nature presents us with somewhat of a code. And I do want to go through these because I think it's important. So when I think of red colored foods, I think of foods that are high in vitamin C. I think of foods that are high in certain polyphenols. So when I think of the color red in nature, I associate that with the inflammatory immune response. And I'm also connecting that into adrenal health. In fact, each of these colors for me connects into an endocrine gland. So as we go through them, be thinking of these perimenopausal women, we want to be focused on cortisol, stress response. And I think that for women coming into the perimenopause, if they haven't dealt with stress, it becomes the big hairy monster toxin and it comes right to the forefront. And to me, it's like, it's number one, you've got to address it and you've got to support adrenal health. So we'll talk about something else to support adrenal health, but in general, red colored foods. And by the way, it's not just the color, but also the diversity. There's a whole science and body of literature on dietary diversity and how that helps people with mood, anxiety, reducing the risk for fractures and falls, helping with cognitive function, helping with blood pressure, helping with gut health, helping with the immune system. So as we think about each of the colors, try to encourage diversity and variety of each one, because what I have found when people try to eat the rainbow, they get stuck on a color. So red is great for all of those things. The color that I think is most relevant for perimenopause is orange. So when you look at some of the orange colored foods, and orange connects to the class of phytochemicals called carotenoids. There are 700 some odd carotenoids, and some of them are a little bit more, I would say, relevant for reproductive health than others. Some very interesting findings around having orange colored fruits that are high in a carotenoid called beta-cryptoxanthin. That's not typically one that we usually hear about. We usually hear about beta-carotene. Beta-carotene is typically coined as a provitamin A compound, which some women may have issues with because there are gene variants that will slow down or reduce the efficiency of the conversion of beta-carotene to vitamin A. So we do need to look at thyroid function and be aware of that connection. But in general, round orange foods, that's how you can think of it, like persimmons or oranges or mangoes, even papaya, which even looks uterine, right? A lot of these different orange fruits help to confer reproductive benefit just due to the carotenoids. I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but there was a study some years ago where they did a sampling of the ovarian tissue, of diseased tissue and healthy tissue, and they found that there was a difference in carotenoid levels between the two. So in the healthy tissue, typically we see 13 to 14 different carotenoids that just localize right there in the ovary. And they seem to be responsible in part for healthy ovulation. So you see that because the corpus luteum, the yellow body, becomes the corpus albicans through the process of ovulation. So one of the things that we want to be thinking about with perimenopause is stacking up even more on the color orange, because there was one study that showed that having more of these orange foods helped to reduce ovarian decline by, I think it was about like 1.3 years or something along those lines, but essentially shaving off some of the ovarian issues that can occur. And when you're looking at a decade long of going through perimenopause, you'll take anything to kind of give you that vitality, right? So remember orange. There was another study looking at the consumption of citrus fruits. Specifically, they were looking at oranges and finding a decreased risk of endometriosis. So that's kind of interesting, right? And it's not just chalking it up to a vitamin like vitamin C. There's more to it. And in fact, orange, just to go into that just a little bit more, if you look at some animal studies, what you see is that when animals are given orange beta carotene, what you see are changes in progesterone in the serum. We haven't actually seen studies of that with people, but there seems to be a correlation here between hormones and orange foods. And even if we don't see a rise in progesterone or other hormone levels, these carotenoids are fat soluble, so they track very well with steroid hormones, right? They're protective for the adipose tissue, which can become inflamed during the perimenopause. All right, so I went on about orange because I think it's really important for the perimenopause. And also, as you're kind of going through these, what I think is also fun to bring out is to have women be thinking about these colors in general, the psychological aspect of them. With yellow, since we're focusing in on gut health tonight, what I would say here is I see a connection of the prebiotic fibers that we find in squashes and other roots. And I also look at digestive enzymes that you find in yellow foods like pineapple, you find bromelain, right? Or even looking at the anti-inflammatory or gastric potential of things like ginger or other kind of fibrous foods that Ashley, you were talking about, right? You look at even the neurotransmitter potential of certain of these foods, like yellow foods stack very high in serotonin. So banana, plantain, and pineapple are some of the highest foods in serotonin. Now, we don't know how that translates from the gut level into the brain level. So if you eat more bananas, are you actually happier? We don't know that. But I think it's of interest to look at that food mood combination here in how many of these foods contain plant-based neurotransmitters, not in their precursor form, but in their outright neurotransmitter form that we would see in our bodies. When I think of a woman going through perimenopause, I think of heart health and how there are so many changes in lipids and also the vasculature, how it becomes more stiff, more tight. Also looking at cardiac capacity because she is starting to, well, she's trying to become more fit and more in tune with her body. So when I think of green foods, I think of the nitrate-rich leafy greens. And also when I think of leafy greens, I think about vitamin K1. And I do think that vitamin K is like the next vitamin D. I think we get too little. And so bringing in a lot of these different nitrate-containing vegetables will be helpful, not just for the heart, but for the vasculature overall, when she may have greater tendency towards varicose veins or issues with circulation up into the brain, right? As she experiences these changes in her brain matter with the withdrawal of things like estradiol. And then finally, since I just mentioned brain, we might as well talk about blue-purple foods, which are rare. Blue-purple foods are precious. So what I would say here, I mean, there's a whole body of literature looking at blue-purple. Even if tonight we just talked about blue-purple foods and brain health, there's enough data to look at the effects on learning, memory, mood. And that is, as Ashley, you were talking about, I mean, in part, it's facilitated through the gut-brain axis, right? So a lot of these polyphenols, which are found in red, purple, blue, black, and some brown foods, they do seem to connect through their postbiotics or whatever metabolites they're making into the brain. And so we look at the short chain fatty acids coming from the fibers, and then the polyphenols producing a lot of these different compounds, whether urolithin A. Somebody was asking on the Q&A about pendulum and these different types of metabolically inclined types of probiotics. So anyway, getting that blue purple will help to facilitate that. Now, you don't see here black foods or brown foods or white foods, but I do put brown into the bucket of the yellow. There's kind of this continuum of yellow, beige, and brown because of the brown with the correlation with bran and fiber. And I do put black into the blue, purple, black because black is like a deeply hued purple or blue. So if you look at blackberries, they look black, but actually they would fall into that category. And when it comes to white, I didn't make a case in this paper, but many times I do talk about white foods as the clearance or the detoxifying aspect of certain foods. So sometimes it's just a blank slate, a reset, a fast. In fact, I just met with Dr. Sachin Panda in La Jolla like last week. And, for women going through this time of life, he talks a lot about time restricted eating, having an 8 to 10 hour window for metabolic health. I think that for perimenopausal women, this can be challenging. And Ashley, I like what you said a lot about we can't abandon carbohydrate. And we may actually need to look at the timing of eating as much as what we're eating and how there could be some shifts because melatonin starts to go up late at night and it can interfere with insulin. So what we want to do is somehow find that right time of eating for her, the circadian rhythm that's personalized to her clock, right? Whatever that can be. So the 4 principles that I talk about with the eating the rainbow is color, obviously, which we just went through, creativity. This is the time of a woman's life where she is reinventing herself. So how can she be more creative with food, with color? Then the diversity piece. And when we are speaking of gut health, we're talking about 30 to 50 unique plant foods in 7 days. If you look at the American Gut Project, what they found was that people that had more than 30 foods, unique foods per week versus people who had less than 10 had changes in short chain fatty acids and better gut health. 30 is really a low bar. I've actually done this in a group setting where I had people track their dietary variety. I had one woman who had 222 different plant foods in the week. So it's not about the serving size. It's just about getting the variety. So that could be having spices, having an herbal tea, counting up all the different herbs in that tea. That counts as part of dietary variety. The 4th principle is rhythm, which really brought me into that whole conversation that I was just mentioning with the circadian rhythm. But she still has a lunar rhythm. She has a seasonal rhythm, and certain foods grown in certain seasons are actually priming her at the hypothalamic level. So the more we can get her eating within the seasonal rhythm, there's also good data on season of birth. So check that out too, because women or just people born in November, sometimes they have a little bit greater risk for things like cardiovascular and respiratory issues. So in that, if you backtrack that into when was their conception, we're looking at February, March, right? And many times vitamin D was low. If you look at in utero, the development, our season of birth, our month of birth is also relevant. So when you're working with clients, what I would say here is use their birth date as their time zero of when do you get your labs? Many people just figure, oh, January, but if your birthday is in September, your time zero is September, right? And looking at your vitamin D from then on out. So as a woman goes through perimenopause, I think that what I have observed is she becomes even more sensitized to all of these rhythms, circadian rhythm, seasonal rhythm, her season of birth and her birth month, and lunar rhythm. Just as she starts to move away from having a period, she will still be in sync and somehow connected into the lunar. Ashley, can you take us to the next slide? So getting into gut health just a little bit more, I know that in functional medicine, we talk a lot about the 5R program, but for me, the way I look at it from a food perspective is the 3P program.
Okay, I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay. So
It's,
all I
our
wanted to say,
computer is perimenopausal. It's doing whatever it wants. But there you go.
has a mind of its own. It didn't like the probiotics talk. Well,
That's
you know,
right.
what this is prompting me to say too is that I think that this is a great time of a woman's life to do the elimination diet and to walk her through that to evaluate all of these functional medicine doctors. She basically came to me with foods that she could eat. Menopausal, right? So I basically did this thing that I called dietary micro rotation, where I opened up the gate on the foods that she was eating. And I said, you know what, just have little bits of everything. Like, don't feel constrained. I don't want you to be in that hypercortisol state. I want you to be in this expansive state where you're just trying a little bit so that you're not having a huge bolus where you could perturb a reaction. And that worked really well for her. So that's just an idea. Then the last category, which we've already talked about, the polyphenols. The polyphenols, if you look at them, there are different kinds of polyphenols. Some of them are short in I would say in chemical structure, like Ashley was talking about coffee. You know, we see caffeic acid, chlorogenic acid, some of these polyphenols. But then you see larger ones. You see ones that come from like elagitonin, or looking at pomegranate and walnut. This is like fish food for the fish, or food for the gut, and especially the colon, right? All of that, I would say that food for it to chomp on will give in return a lot of these metabolites that will help with metabolism. So it's kind of like, you know, encouraging, again, bitters, which is important for metabolic flexibility. You know, all of these three things I think have been very useful in terms of just, again, bringing back the gut. Ashley, next slide, please. So now I'm going to dip in a little bit further into the hormonal side and what we can do from a nutrition point of view as it relates to the hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, adrenal, ovarian axis. Because if you look at when a woman goes through menopause, when is that? Well, typically there's some kind of decline in her endocrine system, whether it's actually the ovarian tissue that is declining in function or in vitality, or maybe structurally, physiologically. Maybe there is a disruption of the biofeedback with the hypothalamus and the pituitary. But all in all, there is something awry with the function of the endocrine system, because it's not just about age. We have to look just wider. And I would say, you know, I'm just returning from a conference over in London with Dr. Joe Pizzorno. You know, we were waxing on all things environmentally toxic, right? You know, you look at, I mean, arsenic is the #1 toxin listed by the CDC. So looking at things like methylation and just making sure that, again, if a woman hasn't dealt with these things before perimenopause, they're all just going to come rearing their head. So I would say looking at labs that would relate to not just nutrient status, like you outlined, Ashley, which were really great in terms of function and the different nutrients, also looking at toxin load. And, you know, many times because her gut absorption and assimilation is not working very well, she doesn't have the nutrients she needs to offset a lot of these environmental toxins. So I guess the question is, and I'm so excited to talk with you about these next slides because this is very novel, of what plants you could use to help the endocrine system actually talk better amongst itself, right? So how do we bring back the feedback loop? How do we create more vitality of the ovaries? Yes, to orange foods, absolutely, as well as the rainbow. Yes, to nutrition and lifestyle, everything that Ashley was mentioning, but there can be some targeted therapies that are plant-derived that can get into that a bit more. So next slide. And again, I just want to mention too that for women going through perimenopause, what can happen is that her endocrine system, which is much like a string of lights, right? So if there's something wrong with one light, with one endocrine system, maybe it's the thyroid, then she can start to see issues with other of the endocrine aspects. So if you work with one of the glands, you're essentially nourishing the entire axis. So the way I think of this is, as you see at the top here, psychoneuroendocrine neuroendocrine. This is how we feel. It's our neurotransmitters also connecting into our endocrine system. And just this year, I coined a new term in IMCJ, which is a journal, Dr. Pizzorno's journal, which is the phytoneuroendocrine system, which is what I'm going to talk about now in terms of using plants to better inform this very intricate system within us. But whenever I see HPA axis, it just kind of ruffles my feathers, or ruffles my neurons, let's say it that way. Because when we look at stress response, many people just limit it to the HPA, but really we're looking at the entire endocrine circuitry. And you know what? Our endocrine circuitry is actually expanding. We are now seeing the liver is endocrine, adipose tissue is endocrine, muscle is endocrine, skin is endocrine. We used to think it was just these classic endocrine glands, but it's actually everything about our body is communicating. It's communicating either autocrine, paracrine, or endocrine in the way of hormones. Next slide, please. So again, I just want to emphasize too that when we're thinking of hormones, we can not talk about endocrine disruptors, right? Because if we need to look at toxin load. In fact, I have an acronym, which is STAME. S is the synthesis of hormones, T is the transport of hormones, A is the activation or the receptor sites, M is the metabolism, and E is the excretion. And M and E, metabolism and excretion, this is what we've got to get right during perimenopause. And what I have seen either through women who are menstruating and having PMS, PMDD, they're not metabolizing hormones correctly. It's not that they have an imbalance, it's just that the metabolism is off. And many times the metabolism can be thrown off because of gene variants, but also because of increased toxin load. So we get an interference there. And then we can start to see premature menopause. We can start to see issues with the gut. And the gut is our first line of defense against these environmental toxicants, right? That's what we want our gut to do, is to protect us from their effects. By the way, I just want to mention here, because we often think of plastics, we think of metals, those are the obvious toxins. But the one that I think we want to pay attention to, especially in perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause, we need to start thinking about artificial light at night, which is an endocrine disruptor, and it's one of the most societally accepted endocrine disruptors, right? So that artificial light at night is tanking her melatonin, which is compromising her sleep, her brain detoxification at night, and her circadian signal for the next day. So I want to stress this because it's not well, I would say, embraced, and we just live by light, electric light, blue light, well into the night. So please just keep that in mind. All right, so what's the solution? Because I'm painting a very dire picture here. So let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to leave you with this as a potential solution and what I have found to be incredible for helping women to better align their endocrine system. So I had the pleasure of going to Peru in December of 2023. And I wanted to go to Peru to experience the people, the land, the country overall, and of course, the food. And one of the foods within Peru that is native to Peru and not to other places. So if you ever see Chinese maca, that is not native to China. But in Peru is where you have maca. And when many people think of maca, what they think of is typically, oh, it's an adaptogen, right? It's just helping me with my stress response. But if you actually go through maca and look at it, it is a food. At least it's a tuber. What you're seeing here in this photograph, you see how the tuber is there, kind of that yellowish portion, but then you have the little roots, then you have and actually the tuber is called hypocotyl, and that's where a lot of the nutrients are. There are certain classifications of phytochemicals within that tuber. In fact, there are 17 different types of maca. You're seeing one type right here. So 17 different phenotypes of maca confer different function, different DNA, and different phytochemicals. And ultimately, you want the right kind of maca for a woman going through perimenopause. You can't just go to the grocery store and pull off the big bag of, just some anonymous generic maca and expect that could just outright help, because you don't have any inkling as to what it's standardized to or even what's in there. Which of the 17 kinds of maca do you have? You can actually be making her symptoms worse with some of the just generic maca without having any knowledge about it. Next slide. I'm cognizant of time here, so I'm going to move faster. All right, so the team that I work with at Symphony, we published a very extensive article. For those of you who like to nerd out like me, we wrote an article called Not All Maca is Created Equal. We reviewed the colors, the nutrition, the phytochemicals, and the clinical uses, and just got into the trenches of all things maca. So what you see here is a table with the functions and the proposed health benefits. So this is why maca doesn't just fit into a nice, neat box of being an adaptogen for stress response. It's used for so many different things, so many different kinds of maca, but you want the right maca for your perimenopausal patients, right? Next slide. So if you just walked away from this webinar with just this information that not all maca has the same mode of action, I would be really happy. There are some that are very good at being adaptogenic. They increase cortisol, they increase testosterone. There are some that you just want them, like purple maca, really pretty. It's high in, what do you think? Polyphenols, anthocyanins, high for its antioxidant, anti-inflammatory potential. Then there are some, and I'm going to specifically go into this one, which are more primed to hormonal regulation. So they don't have as much emphasis on things like adrenals. They're more about the hypothalamus ovarian axis, very specific. Maca is incredibly intelligent. And a lot of this work on maca for women's health was brought out by a woman in the 60s. Her name is Gloria Chacon. She was a Peruvian woman. This was the subject of her dissertation. So I even love that the lineage of maca for women's health, rather than for men's health, where you see a lot of data on, that it was even brought to light by a woman. And because it's high in, I know Ashley's favorite compounds, the glucosinolates, it is also helpful with metabolic detoxification. All right, next slide. This is just showing the different maca phenotypes. And in the paper, what we did is we just kind of put together the different colors and just showed where they were acting. For example, there are certain ones that are good for the prostate that would not be good for women going through menopause. You would not want those. There are certain ones that would help more with, I would say, again, more fertility, and that would be different than what you'd want in perimenopause. So next slide, because I want to leave you with the goods. So there is one particular combination of phenotypes, which encompasses the yellow, the black, the red, and the purple phenotypes in different ratios that has been studied. And in the studies, it's called Maca GO. G is gelatinized and O is organic. So it's organic, and it's also gone through this process of gelatinization to make it more bioavailable, right? So there are 4 published clinical trials using this Maca GO material. And what is most impressive, I think, is that it has an effect on hormones. So in addition to the hormones, which I'm going to show you on the next slide, there were also studies showing improvements in bone density. And this is not changing calcium or anything else, but actually seeing improvements in bone mineral density, seeing improved body composition and lipids, and perhaps most importantly for a perimenopausal woman, seeing a reduction in her perimenopausal symptoms. All right, the next slide, which I feel is probably the most impactful if you're focused on hormones, because how many plant compounds actually increase the synthesis of different hormones through the endocrine axis? Most times they're a phytoestrogen and they're just keying into the receptor site. They're not actually changing hormone levels. But with Maca GO, what you see here, you see how you have these purplish bars and then you see the gray bars. So for when the women were on Maca GO for the first 2 months, you see how their estradiol went up. This is serum estradiol. Their progesterone went up. Then you reverse that and you say, okay, let's start them out on placebo and then go into giving them the Maca GO, and you see that there is that increase there. So these study designs were really great for eliminating, I mean, you can't really, I don't think that there's a strong placebo effect for altering serum hormones, but there were so many different beautiful configurations to this study design showing that they did increase estradiol levels within the range that would be biologically appropriate for a woman of that age frame. So you're not going from a 50-year-old to being a 30-year-old. You're just not moving You're actually just bolstering your hormones to the level that your body can endogenously produce them, right? So there are no hormones in the Maca Geo. All right, last slide. I think we got it there, Ashley. That was a lot of information for everybody. I'm sure that people will have questions and want to contact us.
Well, and I want to go back to this here. This is something I've been seeing in my clinical practice, and you know this because I was very nervous to use Maca, both personally and professionally. I had more of the soybean phytoestrogen. I don't want to just push that side of it. And what's been really interesting to me, like ever since you introduced me, this is the Symphony Natural, the Feminescence, and I used it in the earlier time period and then now in perimenopause, and there are adjusted doses. I use the one that I get through Fullscript. But what I've been seeing with my patients is that it has had a really stabilizing effect on a hormonal cycle that is anything less than stabilized. So whether it's, some months my period's 18 it stays on for 18 days, or some months the cycle, like all of these different lengths. And we were really struggling to figure out, and again, like just on a very personal level, to figure out how to navigate that, even with things like you're, using progesterone or other pieces. And just the results in terms of both blood test and, more importantly for me, like stabilizing in energy and like not feeling such the highs and lows. So that was really surprising. And the reason I had come to you and felt comfortable was you were able to explain to me just the differences in Maca, which I think is one of those that helped me get over the hump of not just thinking about this as, that all Macas are created equal. So that was, definitely, I think, I feel like if it was an awakening moment for me, it can be one that I can share with our colleagues on that part. I will turn it over to Jocelyn because, well, I might be able to see the chat box here, but Jocelyn, do we have time for questions? Do we have questions?
Yes, truly. I mean, thank you both, first and foremost.
Yeah.
That was absolutely incredible. I think we have time truly for just one question here, and I do kind of see a common theme in a couple of these. So I will have you answer this, Ashley, live. I think there are some questions around the protein recommendations, and if you could provide any more clarity on what that might mean.
You bet. Yes. And you're more than welcome also to, I think this is over on our blog at the Better Nutrition Program. And, we have resources on that. So one of the things I think that we do want to be clear about is that we want a higher than the historic RDAs. I would jokingly historically be like, oh, these are silly amounts, or like, what are these helpful for? And, we would just find that it was too low. But one of the issues that I think is more important is that it's problematic to look at an amount of protein in the day and give somebody that. It's also like if you have $100 to spend, or, anyone who's done Weight Watchers, that kind of approach where it's like, if you have 18 points and you spend 2 of them in the morning and you have 16 of them at night, we're not going to see the same results as if we're sort of spreading them out throughout the day. So one key thing to focus on is, while we may want to look at somebody's protein needs in terms of as it relates to their body weight, and I'll come to that in a second, you do want to be thinking about splitting up the protein intake throughout the day and looking at making sure you're never getting too little protein. So there literally shouldn't be an eating occasion, a pit stop, a beverage occasion, whatever it is, where you're taking in nutrients where you don't have protein. That would be pretty hard in nature anyway. And you also don't want to exceed, you don't want to go too high on protein. So you don't want to be, I've seen with some of my carnivore clients or people where they're just trying to meet these like crazy high amounts of protein recommendations where they're at 40, 50, 60 grams, and that's upsetting their blood sugar. It's actually causing weight gain. It's like, just things that we want to look at. So when we look at those numbers, what we've moved to is, instead of 0.8 grams per kilogram, really looking at that 0.8 or 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. But when you get really above, what I found for women and even for men, like above about 150 grams of protein in a day, it is really hard to do that in a way that your body's digestive system is going to be able to process and utilize and not have it have negative consequences. So one of the other things that's so important is to look at your amino acid profile. I found that when we've optimized and delivered a better variety of proteins, that and delivered a better variety of amino acids, that we can actually help somebody achieve their goals at a lower amount of protein intake. So a couple of clarifications. I personally, and what we use is somewhere around 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of desirable body weight. And then I also, after somebody's desirable body weight is above 150 pounds, I really look at, so if somebody's desirable body weight is 200 pounds, that difference of that 50 grams, of protein in there spread throughout the day, can I achieve that more efficiently at, say, the 150, 160 rather than at the 190, 200? So, I think when we look at that, there's a lot to consider, and we will have a whole protein discussion coming out of that one as well. We did put our emails here in case any of the questions that let me move this out of there. Any of the questions that you really feel like you have coming out of this, or you can, grab us on social media, but would be happy to answer them there. As Jocelyn, I know we promised everyone we'd do this in an hour, and I wanted like 3 more hours of Deanna. And of course, she was talking about orange, which is the color I struggle the most to get in. Does turmeric count? That was my other question. Can I ask one question? Can turmeric count as much as some of the other oranges that you were mentioning?
A little bit different. So you have the curcuminoids in turmeric, which aren't the same as the carotenoids. So it's good as an anti-inflammatory that could help with the gynecological gut access, but not necessarily creating that ovarian vitality that we're looking at with the carotenoids.
Okay. So thank you for correcting me with one that I've been trying to MacGyver a different solution. That's my promise moving forward. Everybody take one piece. Maybe yours is to try the right kind of maca, figure that part out. Mine is going to be better about my orange, which is every time I talk to you, Deanna, that's the same thing.
What about mango? Don't you like mango? I'm crazy.
No, I don't.
Mango.
Like
Ever since I went through menopause, I have just been naturally craving mango, like dried mango, not sugary, but yes.
Yes. All right. I'll work on it. The kids like the frozen mango. So like that's my niece.
There you go.
Maybe I'll work that in. Jocelyn, what else can we do for you as we send people off into their evenings on this part?
You have gone above and beyond. We can't thank you enough. To everyone out there,